The digital void of Craigslist, usually a repository for discarded furniture and questionable roommate ads, had coughed up something genuinely peculiar. It was a job posting, stark and minimalist, devoid of the usual corporate jargon or desperate pleas for experienced baristas. Just a single, unsettling line. Night shift, unconventional duties, high pay. The location was vaguely listed as a periphery of Oak Haven, a town I'd driven through once, a place that seemed to exhale a perpetual sigh of gray skies and forgotten dreams. Desperation, like a persistent cough, had been plaguing me for months. My savings had dwindled to the point of being almost mythical, and the stack of rejection letters from every publishing house east of the Mississippi was threatening to topple and bury me under its weight. I was a writer, or at least I aspired to be, and the romantic notion of starving for my art had curdled into a bitter, gnawing reality. So, against my better judgment and with a prickle of unease that felt like static cling on my skin, I replied to the ad. The response was swift, a terse email devoid of pleasantries. It simply stated a time and address for an interview. The address was even more vague than the job location, merely a county road number in Oak Haven. No company name, no contact person beyond the anonymous email address. It felt like stepping into the opening scene of a low-budget horror film, the kind where the protagonist is invariably told that don't go in there, and of course, promptly does. The drive to Oak Haven was as dreary as I'd remembered. The November sky was a low, bruised purple, and skeletal trees clawed at the horizon. The county road eventually led me to a secluded property, hidden behind a screen of overgrown pines. There was a house, or rather a mansion in a state of genteel decay. Its Gothic architecture was beautiful in a haunting way, but the peeling paint, the boarded-up windows on the upper floors, and the palpable air of neglect spoke of long years of abandonment. A single light flickered weakly in a downstairs window, like a nervous pulse in the darkness. Swallowing a lump of apprehension, I parked my battered sedan and walked up the long, cracked driveway. The front door, a massive oak monstrosity studded with iron, was slightly ajar. Hesitantly, I pushed it open and stepped into a cavernous hallway. The air inside was cold and damp, carrying the scent of dust and something else. Something metallic, faintly unsettling. A figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hall. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to absorb the meager light. His face was long and pale, framed by thinning gray hair, and his suit, though impeccably tailored, looked as old and worn as the house itself. "You're here for the interview," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the house. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I managed, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the vast space. He turned and led me down the hallway, his footsteps silent on the worn Persian rug runner. We entered a room that was surprisingly warm and dimly lit by a single desk lamp. The room was Spartan, containing only a heavy wooden desk, a couple of chairs, and bookshelves that stretched to the high ceiling, overflowing with ancient-looking volumes, bound in dark leather. He gestured to a chair. I sat, feeling like a nervous supplicant before some ancient enigmatic power. He settled behind the desk, his gaze fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. "You responded to the advertisement," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "You understand the nature of the position is unconventional?" "Yes," I said, though I understood nothing of the sort. The ad was vague. A flicker of something amusement crossed his lips, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. A vagueness is sometimes necessary. Suffice it to say, this is not typical employment. It requires discretion and a certain willingness. "Willingness to do what exactly?" I asked, my unease growing. "A custodial, like cleaning?" I asked, a wave of relief washing over me. Perhaps this wasn't so strange after all. Just a slightly eccentric old man needing a night watchman and cleaner. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent a shiver down my spine. A cleaning in a manner of speaking, but not of dust and cobwebs. Let's just say, you will be maintaining order, ensuring certain boundaries are respected. Boundaries? Order. It sounded increasingly cryptic and less like a standard cleaning job. And what exactly are these boundaries? I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. He steepled his fingers and regarded me with an appraising look. "That you will learn in time. For now, know this. The work is solitary, it is demanding, and it is crucial. Are you still interested?" The high-pay part of the ad flashed in my mind. In the gnawing desperation, "Yes," I said, perhaps a little too quickly. "I am." "Very well. You start tonight. Report here at midnight. Do not be late, and do not speak of this to anyone. Understood?" Understood, I replied, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and morbid curiosity. Good, then you are dismissed. He stood, a silent dismissal, and I felt myself rising and backing away, out of the room and back into the shadowy hallway. I left the house feeling like I'd just signed a contract written in invisible ink, the terms and conditions hidden in the spaces between the lines. Midnight, the house was even more menacing in the full darkness. The single light was gone and the mansion loomed against the night sky like a skeletal giant. I parked and walked to the front door, which was now wide open, swallowing the faint moonlight. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. I called out a hesitant hello, but only silence answered. Following a faint flickering candlelight from down the hallway, I made my way to the same room as before. The gaunt man was there, standing by the desk, a single candle casting long, dancing shadows across his face. You are punctual, he said, his voice even lower in the stillness of the night. Good. Tonight you will begin your training. I will show you your duties. He picked up the candle and gestured for me to follow. We walked through the house, deeper into its shadowed heart. The rooms were filled with antique furniture draped in dust sheets, portraits with eyes that seemed to follow us, and an unsettling stillness that felt almost expectant. Finally, we reached a door at the end of a long, narrow corridor. It was made of heavy, dark wood, reinforced with iron bands and secured by a large, ornate padlock. The gaunt man unlocked the padlock with a heavy iron key he produced from his pocket. The sound of the lock clicking open echoed unnervingly in the silence. He pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up from below was damp and earthy, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible odor that made my nostrils twitch. This is where your duties begin, he said, holding the candle aloft and descending the stairs. I hesitated for a moment, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, then followed him down into the darkness. The staircase opened into a large subterranean chamber. It was a cellar, but unlike any cellar I had ever seen. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and the air was thick with moisture and the strange metallic scent I'd noticed earlier, now stronger, almost like blood. In the center of the chamber there was a large circular pit ringed by a low stone wall, and inside the pit something moved. My heart hammered against my ribs. I strained my eyes in the flickering candlelight, trying to make out what was in the pit. It was dark, viscous, and alive. It pulsed and writhed, a black oily mass that seemed to breathe with a slow, guttural rhythm. What is that? The gaunt man turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the candlelight. This, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is what you're here to maintain. He gestured to a set of tools leaning against the wall, shovels, rakes, and a peculiar-looking device that resembled a long, hooked prod. Our duty, he continued, is to keep it contained, to ensure it does not expand. It is sensitive. It requires constant vigilance. Contained? What is it contained from? I asked. From everything, he said cryptically. From this house, from this world. It is a boundary, you see, and you are the keeper of that boundary. He then proceeded to explain my routine. Every night I was to descend into the cellar and inspect the pit. If the mass within it had expanded beyond a certain point marked by a series of crude lines scratched into the stone wall, I was to use the hooked prod to agitate it, to encourage it to recede, as he put it. He demonstrated the technique, cautiously reaching into the pit with the prod and stirring the black mass. It reacted with a sluggish, viscous movement, like tar stirred in slow motion. The task was repulsive, unsettling beyond words, but the pay he had mentioned and the sheer strangeness of the situation held me captive. I was a writer after all, and this was a story unfolding before my very eyes. For the first few nights, the routine was uneventful. I would descend to the cellar at midnight, check the pit, and, if necessary, prod the black mass. It was always there, always pulsating, always emitting that faint metallic odor, but it remained within the marked boundaries. The gaunt man, whose name I learned was Mr. Silas, was always there to supervise, his silent presence adding to the oppressive atmosphere. But on the fifth night, things changed. When I descended to the cellar, the air was heavier, colder than usual. The metallic smell was overpowering, acrid and sharp, and when I looked into the pit, my blood ran cold. The black mass had expanded. It had breached the marked boundaries. It was no longer contained. It oozed and writhed, filling almost the entire pit, its surface bubbling and churning. And as I stared, mesmerized by its grotesque vitality, I realized something else. It was reaching. Tendrils of the black mass were extending up the stone wall, probing, searching. Panic seized me. I grabbed the hook prod, my hands trembling. Mr. Silas, I called out, my voice cracking with fear. It's out of control." Mr. Silas appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale in the flickering candlelight. He looked down at the pit, his eyes widening in alarm. Quickly he hissed, "Prod it, push it back." I lunged forward, wielding the prod like a weapon. I plunged it into the black mass, stirring, pushing, desperate to force it back within the boundaries. But it was like stirring treacle. The mass resisted, thick and viscous, and as I prodded, it seemed to react with a violent surge, a sudden expansion that sent a spray of black droplets flying through the air. Some of the droplets landed on my skin. They felt cold, oily, and strangely alive. Where they touched, my skin prickled and burned. A wave of nausea washed over me. Suddenly, the black mass surged again, this time with an incredible force. It erupted from the pit, a geyser of blackness that shot upwards, engulfing the cellar in its viscous spray. I screamed and stumbled back, dropping the prod. The black mass was everywhere, coating the walls, the floor, rising like a tide. It was reaching for me. I turned and scrambled for the stairs, desperate to escape the suffocating blackness. But as I reached the bottom step, I felt something grab my ankle. A thick, oily tendril of the black mass had snaked out and wrapped around my leg, tightening its grip with surprising strength. I cried out in terror and fell, sprawling on the stone floor. The tendril tightened, dragging me back towards the pit. I clawed at the stone floor, trying to pull myself away, but it was no use. The black mass was relentless, pulling me closer to the churning, bubbling pit. I could smell it now, the metallic odor intensified, mingled with something else, something ancient and foul. The black mass was rising around me, engulfing my legs, my torso. I could feel it seeping through my clothes, cold and clammy against my skin. Panic choked me. Scream trapped in my throat. Just as I thought I was about to be dragged into the pit, to be swallowed whole by the living darkness, I saw Mr. Silas. He was standing at the top of the stairs, holding the candle aloft, his face a mask of horror and resignation. He didn't move. He didn't try to help me. He just watched as if this was an inevitable conclusion, a price that had to be paid. In a desperate, last-ditch effort, I reached out and grabbed the edge of the bottom step, clinging to it with all my remaining strength. The black tendril pulled and pulled, but I held on, my muscles screaming in protest. For a moment, it was a stalemate, a terrifying tug-of-war between life and oblivion. Then, with a surge of adrenaline born of pure terror, I kicked out with my free leg, lashing out at the black mass that had ensnared me. My foot connected with something solid, something surprisingly resistant within the viscous substance, and to my astonishment, the tendril loosened its grip. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled up the stairs, scrambling over Mr. Silas, who still stood frozen, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. I didn't stop running until I was out of the house, out of the grounds, and speeding away in my car, leaving Oakhaven and the nightmare mansion behind me in a cloud of dust and terror. I never looked back. I never contacted Mr. Silas. I never went near Craigslist again. The memory of the black mass, the cold, oily touch, the metallic stench still haunts my nightmares. I don't know what it was, what I was supposed to be containing, or what would have happened if it had fully escaped. But I know this. Some boundaries are best left undisturbed, and some jobs are not worth any amount of money, especially when they lead you to the precipice of a darkness so profound. It threatens to swallow not just your life, but your very soul. The night shift at Oakhaven taught me that lesson in the most brutal, near-fatal way imaginable, and it's a lesson I will carry with me etched in fear and adrenaline for the rest of my days.